known, adversarial. Okay, that's somebody setting me up for a good presentation. Adversarial, stressful. All right, so a lot of words here, and what I'm seeing is that no one has it figured out. And if you're here because you think I'm going to tell you how to figure it out, maybe a little bit, but it's certainly a challenge. So that's okay. So the good news is if you were walking here thinking that you were behind everybody else, you're not. And we've been going down this path for a few years at Small Footprint. We're still behind too, so we're still playing catch up. But we have been doing it for a while. And so what I'm going to do today really is just tell you a little bit about some of the challenges we've had. And you guys are clearly, that's a lot of really hard, magical's good. So somebody has had a magical experience. So that sounds like a setup there, doesn't it? Non-existent. So we're going to talk a little bit about DevOps and how you can get there. And I'm going to give you a few hacks on what you can do about that. But it's largely going to be talking about the culture of the code and why DevOps impacts culture and how you can change your culture to help improve your DevOps experience. So thanks for all that good feedback. It was really good. Just a few words about myself. I'm Patrick Turner. I'm the CTO at Small Footprint. We're headquartered here in Winston-Salem, just over in Winston Tower. It's the big box that the Reynolds building came in, if you're familiar with that one. I have been in Winston-Salem about 11 years now. My background is actually software development, so I'm an engineer. I started coding when I was a kid, was a heads down coder through a lot of my career and have managed all sorts of different teams, including distributed teams, so yes, distributed agile. But really, what I've seen is that DevOps has been the thing that has really changed software development the most in my career, probably second only to when we really started moving to the web. And you know, we've all heard, well, it worked on my machine. And the reality is that most software projects fail, and most of them fail because of communications. Anybody feel like they've had a software project fail because of poor communications? Yeah, everybody should be throwing their hand up, and it's true. And that really goes on all parts. The QA doesn't know what to test. The developer doesn't really know what the business is wanting. Operations is completely out of the loop. They don't know when those releases are coming to them. And really, it just becomes chaos. And as a result, what we want to do with DevOps is we really want to get everybody rowing in the same direction. That's our goal. And of course, ultimately, our goal is to deliver great software. And the way that I look at DevOps is really just an extension of Agile. So, you know, Agile helped the development team start talking to each other. How many folks in here have an Agile shop or a shop that you're trying to get Agile? So a few of you. Well, if you're starting to learn those lessons about Agile, really the way I look at it is we're taking Agile and just extending that with DevOps down through the rest of the organization. So how many people have a definition for DevOps, or do you think you know what DevOps means? And it's okay, I'm not going to correct you. Only a few hands. So when I do talk about DevOps, a lot of people have different definitions. That's okay. We rewrote this definition of DevOps probably 10 times, and I'll probably change it again before I do this presentation again. But really, what we look at as DevOps is integrating and automating processes, creating transparency, and that's the real key part, so that people can build great software. Because again, that's what we're trying to do, is build great software. And DevOps is a lot about tools, and if you guys have played around with any tools, you've used probably continuous integration, continuous deployment, but those are just the tools. What really we're trying to do is change the way we work together and really change our culture. And that's the real challenge, extending that Agile culture through the rest of the organization. And I promise I'm not going to make you guys pull your phones out a lot, but I do want to get just one quick level set here. I'm curious, for those of you who are going into DevOps who haven't started yet, what's your biggest challenge with implementing DevOps? So 5, and again, you can use that same text thread that you just had. All you need to do is give me a letter. So A, education, B, culture, C, time, D, tools, or you have no plan. So we're all across the board. Culture. You guys are setting me up for this conversation about culture, right? So really then, it seems like the first part is no plan. Maybe I can help you with a few of those things around here. But culture is winning. So again, I think y'all are helping me out as well to really show you the point that culture is a huge challenge around this, because you actually have to get people to start talking to each other. And really that challenge exists because we all have these silos in our development organizations. So the developers very often aren't actually talking to the business. Certainly they're not talking to those operations guys. They tell them on a Friday that they're going to be having a deployment that weekend. They say, guess what, you get to come in Saturday night. I see some heads being nodded there. QA are the ones who are interesting because they're the ones who are supposed to test the software, but they're very often the most out of the loop, right? They don't know what they're supposed to be testing. They don't know how they're going to go about testing it. They don't even know where they can go to test it. They don't know where that latest build is. They can go to test it. And as I mentioned, operations, these guys are the ones who have the scariest jobs because on Friday afternoon, they're going to have some code thrown over the wall and somebody give them a list of instructions to deploy and say, good luck. And then they don't answer their phone, right? That's anybody, any assist admins been there? Yeah, a few hands. Get some real world there. So what we're trying to do is break down those silos. We're trying to connect those people. And that's really why we want to implement these DevOps tools, is to get these people talking to each other and create transparency between these people. So I'm going to talk about a few areas of DevOps, and you're going to see my DevOps definition is actually pretty broad. I didn't talk about just continuous integration, for example. I'm going to talk about the whole spectrum of things around that. And we're going to start off by defining some of the process. The first thing we're going to look at is unit tests. Got one more quick survey just to level set what I should be talking about here. So tell me about how you're doing unit tests in your current practice. How mature are you? You just getting started? Decent coverage, that's good. Nobody has 100% coverage yet. I've actually had a couple of people say 100% coverage. I'm pretty sure they were lying, but and we have a few honest people down there saying what's unit testing, so that's good. I'll give a short answer to that in a second here. So good news is most of you are getting started, and that's really great because really the key here is that when we're looking at development and this whole DevOps continuum, unit testing is the most important part. So we are all probably pretty familiar with coding. We're familiar with committing that code to our source code repository. Most of us aren't unit testing, and I can say that's true in my organization. There were very few projects where we had decent unit test coverage. And by the way, speaking of what unit tests are, this is essentially code testing code. So there was a few of you who didn't know what that meant. So if you have let's say you have a class, and the purpose of that class is to do addition. Your unit test might send 1 and 1 as variables into that unit test, and then the unit test wants to make sure that you get 2 out of that addition class, right? So it's just simply a way, if you've heard of the term test-driven development, that's what that's all about as well. So unit test is literally that. It's code, testing code. But you know, this is probably the biggest challenge we continue to have at Small Footprint, because developers really are just kind of gotten into the habit of they do some coding and throw it over the wall and let the QA find the problem, right? Anybody guilty of this? Yeah, okay, some honest people raise their hands. So the idea behind unit testing is that the developer is actually going to be putting some code in place that will actually test that code up front before it ever gets to the QA. And I tell you, it's been our biggest challenge because we have all sorts of excuses. So the developers say we don't have time to build unit tests, which is, if you're a manager, that's your problem. You need to address that because eventually it's going to balance it out. They don't really understand how to actually even get started. And in some cases, what we found is that our projects were really not very well architected for unit tests. So in that example I gave you, it was simply that class was going to be a class to do addition. I'm going to pass in 2 variables, get 1 result out. Pretty simple, right? Well, we've probably all written some code where we have this class that's 47,000 lines of code. That thing's going to be really tough to write effective unit tests around. So it actually makes you realize that very often your applications aren't very well architected for that. So it actually helps identify even some tech debt. That's a whole other conversation. But really, what we want to do here is get started and help developers actually have some responsibility directly for quality, not just relying upon QAs. And really, ultimately, the thing to know is before you really are going to get any huge value out of that CI server, whether you're using Jenkins or any other continuous integration environment, if you don't have good unit tests, you're going to be missing out on a lot of the value that brings to the table. So what we found, again, is the biggest challenge with unit tests is really just getting started. And so what we did as a little way to sort of prompt people is we actually had a contest. We got an iPad and we said, everybody that can show that they've put a unit test into their code, into one of their projects, didn't matter how complex or how simple that unit test was, we're going to throw your name in the hat for an iPad. And we had most of our development teams actually put a unit test into their code. Some of them had excuses, and we were not entirely strict about that, but at least the fact that they were looking at their application from the perspective of doing a unit test, they got their name in the hat, and we gave away an iPad. So again, the real challenge here is just getting started with the whole thing. But once you do get started, you either find that it's not as hard as you thought, or you found some of those challenges, like maybe needing to re-architect some of your code. So next thing we're going to talk about a little bit is source code management. And of course, somebody earlier today, I was hearing him say he was actually coding before there were source code repositories. I think I was too. But when we all got started with our first source code repository, we were probably all working in one master branch or master code base. And we were all playing in that same field, and it was a lot of fun. And really, it was crazy because, okay, it's time to put a deployment out there. We want to go live with something. And oh shit, this guy's got this thing that's only half baked, and what are we going to do? It gets all crazy. So the first thing we did is like, well, let's have a development branch. What a great idea. We're not going to have everybody essentially playing in production. We're going to have this branch over here where we can play in development, so at least it's segregated outside of that main source code base. And that helped a lot, but everybody was working in that same branch, so we still had situations where we were stepping on each other's toes. We still had the blame game. And ultimately, this was a culture problem, right? Because we were trying to go live with things, and it was chaos. So the real key of distributed source code management, and we generally all talk about Git these days, is this notion of feature branching. Is anybody feature branching today? Good, a lot of hands. So if you're not familiar with that concept, the idea is that you actually can group together user stories, or maybe an epic, or whatever level you want to group together into their own feature branches, so that the teams are actually working independently of each other. They don't have to worry so much about stepping on each other's toes when they want to go make a go-live decision. And of course, the nice thing is that this is a self-organizing culture, right? So it sounds very agile, and it truly is, because the development teams are getting to decide, hey, how do we want to group these things together in these feature branches so that we can all work well together? The reality is it does take some time to come up with good strategies around this, but it's certainly worthwhile. And I'll tell you, we've had a lot of our teams that said, oh, well, we moved all of our code to Git, so we're doing feature branching, it's good, right? Just because you've migrated from TFS or wherever over into a distributed source code repository is not going to buy you the value. It's like unit tests and CI. If you're not building good unit tests, you're not getting the value out of continuous integration. If you're not doing good strategy around your feature branching, then you're really not getting the value out of moving over to Git. And by the way, the thing that's probably my favorite thing, since we all love to get the calls when we have bugs, is if you're doing good feature branching strategy, you're keeping all those new features off in their own branches into these segregated areas, so that if you have a bug pop up, you can very confidently fix that bug, branch that off of your master branch, deal with the bug, get it back in, get it into production, get it fixed without worrying about if somebody's half-baked feature is over here sitting in that master code branch. So it really makes that process a lot simpler. And of course, then when you go back to merge that feature branch back into your main development branch, then you can actually know that the results of that bug fix are going to be there. So it makes a huge difference in that whole process. And the real key is that what we're trying to do here at the end of the day is get clean code to production. So the reality is that we actually did have several of our teams that wanted to push back, and they thought, oh, we're in Git, we have a development branch, we're all good, we can work well together. And we've had that mistake of actually pushing code to production when it wasn't quite ready. And so the real key here is that you have to make sure that your team realizes good strategy is what it's all about. You got to take the time to figure out how the teams are going to work together. And it may be for the next sprint, it may be for the next epic, it may be for whatever distance you want to go. But the real key is that you want to make sure you develop a good strategy. And ultimately what it's going to do is it's going to create this culture of transparency. It's going to change how you work. And of course that's all about changing the culture in your organization. So next up we're going to talk about the QA cycle. And a lot of people say, what does QA have to do with DevOps? Well, for me, I really feel like DevOps has changed the QA's role probably more than any other area. Because DevOps is all about automation, and what automation does for the QA is it really enables the QA to add more value to the process. It changes their role, and it really helps them to focus on quality, and ultimately it's going to help the team create better software. So back in the day, how many of you guys have on your team a QA engineer who had a previous job title of customer service rep? Nobody's going to be honest? Okay, how many people have worked with a QA in the past who's been a customer service rep? Right? So the reality was they were in that job because they were really good at breaking the application, right? And so you said, hey, you guys always find the bug. Why don't you come join our QA team? And that was great. But really, what they were ultimately focused on was this manual testing. They were just banging on it until they could break it. Bang, bang, bang. We have a fancy term for that now. We call it smoke testing. But really, it's just sort of your sophisticated user who was good at breaking the software, so you asked them if they would come be a QA. And certainly there is a valid role for that. And I don't mean to diminish that person's role because they do add a lot of value to the team. But really, the automation that's come with DevOps has meant that now we're creating these test scripts, and now we can have the machine actually start doing performance testing, security testing, automated regression testing, so that it turns that QA from someone who's really just focused on that grunt work, bang, 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 to turning it into where the engine is doing that grunt work, and now they can actually focus on creating more value. And so it's all about having that engineer's bugs. They're going to fix some of them with the unit testing, and now they're going to have this automated testing that's going to find a lot more of those bugs so that your QA is able to add more value by actually communicating with the product owner more, working with your product management team and with your users to really actually understand what we're trying to do instead of just trying to hunt down those nasty bugs that the machine can find. So the real key is that we want to turn the QA from those tedious and manual tasks, from being that code breaker, to actually creating value, to becoming a value maker in the organization. The thing for us is that we realized is that not every traditional QA is going to want to become a test automation engineer, and that's okay because, as I said, there's lots of different roles in the QA world these days. And the reality is you're going to have to invest in some education. So we had to bring in some folks to help us learn new tools like Selenium and all those things that go around that to do a better job. But ultimately now, because we're building these automated tests, our QAs can now focus on more important things that we've never really focused on much before, like user experience acceptance testing that we never thought about before. And so it's really, again, just changed that whole role of what the QA is doing. So next we're going to talk about deployment. And of course, it is the heart of DevOps. When most people talk about DevOps, they're thinking about deployment, and that's fair. But we really look at it as not just deploying to production, but actually deploying at multiple points in the process, because that's where we really add a whole lot of value. And again, there's lots of parts of this. So the automated tests we're talking about, integration tests. You want to make sure that you have continuous integration to make sure you have clean builds. But again, all of these things now are being done by the machine. This is where you have such a big difference. And ultimately, what you want the developer's goal to now become is delivering software that's ready for QA and for the stakeholder. Because the machine's going to find a lot of those problems by the time they get down to the QA. And I tell you, one of the funny mistakes that we continue to see is when your team says, oh, we broke the build, but that's okay, we know why, let's get it to production. Don't do that. It's really a terrible thing. And so you want to add continuous integration and continuous delivery into your pipeline. It's going to help with those stress-free deployments. But more importantly, it's going to improve visibility of the process. Everyone needs to know those builds are breaking, and it's going to increase transparency across the organization. And the great thing about these automated tools as well is that everyone in your organization should have visibility to them so that you know exactly what's going on at any point in the process. So next, we're going to talk a little bit about operations, and of course this is the ops part that we talk about primarily here. There's been really 4 main areas that I look at that have changed a lot because of DevOps. Containers, infrastructure as code, orchestration, and monitoring. And so really the key with all of this and the way things are changing is instead of having just the architect working in a bubble or just the sysadmin working in a bubble, we really have to have those folks working together. So the architect with the development team working alongside the sysadmin to actually define what the environments look like. And so one of the key areas is containers, and essentially what a container is going to do for you is help define all the dependencies that are required to put that application together. The next piece is infrastructure as code. The key with infrastructure as code is you're actually going to use scripts to define exactly what that infrastructure looks like. And again, it's not going to be just the architect, it's not going to be just the sysadmin. They're going to be working together to make sure that they've defined what that container needs to look like and what that infrastructure needs to look like so that we can all maintain all of the standards that the organization expects us to have, et cetera, et cetera. The most important part is, though, is because we're actually scripting how that environment's going to look between the container and the infrastructure as code, that environment's going to look exactly the same from production all the way back through stage and QA and on the actual developer's environment. So now that whole question of, well, it worked on my machine. If it worked on your machine, it should work in production because your machine should look exactly like production because you're using the same scripts to establish all of those environments. It also enables things like orchestration, which can actually manage your production environments and load balancing and even help you work across different services. And the real advantage of that is that you get these graceful recovery from failures. So once you have all these things automated, then the system itself can be spinning up instances, bringing down instances, helping you as you roll out new features in an actual strategic way as opposed to just putting them out there and hoping that things do well. So an example like canary staging. So the real key here, and if you didn't pick up on this, is that we have to give up control. So if you're a sysadmin, you're going to have to give up some control to the developer. If you're a developer, you're going to have to take on some more responsibilities, no more just throwing the code over to the wall to the sysadmin hoping it works. But what we want to try to do is eliminate that finger pointing that happens in the traditional process. And the way we do that is because, again, the software is going to work exactly the same in everywhere that it gets rolled out to because it's going to look, the environment's going to look the same and the containers are going to look the same everywhere that it goes. And so it really eliminates that problem. You guys read The Phoenix Project? Anybody? It's one of my favorite books. Okay, so if you are taking notes, you should write down The Phoenix Project. It's a great one. The real key here is when you read that book, you're going to be reading about a guy named Brent. And Brent basically was the one guy who knew where all the bodies were buried. Do y'all have a Brent in your organization? The guy that pretty much nothing happens if you don't go through Brent. If he's on vacation, you got to help you. You don't do a deployment that week, right? So the key with all of this is that when you're automating these processes through continuous integration, building good unit tests, building good deployment through continuous deployment, you can help eliminate some of those challenges with Brent in your organization because you're going to be automating those things and you don't have to worry about things breaking because nobody knows where those things are sitting. So it's a huge shift. Quick word about monitoring. It's really changed a lot. I mean, we talked about orchestration a little bit, which eliminates some of the need for monitoring in some minds because you have a system that's actually ensuring that all of your environments are up and about. But really, the key is that you want to make sure that since you have these automated systems that you're actually monitoring at a lot more levels. So, back in the day, you might be looking for a website just to make sure that a piece of text is sitting on that home page. Okay, it's there, the website's good. Now you should be really looking at ensuring that you're doing monitoring all the way down to the database table to ensure that if things are happening funny in the database, so rows are showing up or what have you, and there's great new tools that allow you to do that. But the key is that you want to build your monitoring so that you're identifying problems before anyone notices. And that sounds sneaky, and I'm going to actually reverse myself a little bit on that because at the same time, you want to make sure that that monitoring that you're putting in place is visible to all the stakeholders. So, back in the day, something would break, we'd try to quickly fix it real quick before our boss notices. Now, with your monitoring tools, whether it's your CI tool to see if that build is breaking, all the way through to the tools that are monitoring the database level on your production environment, you should be making sure that all of that is visible to everyone in your organization, all the stakeholders, so that there's no surprises from anyone. And that's a real key. So really, the key is that you need to have sophisticated monitoring tools, helping to find problems before your users have to raise their hands to tell you about those problems. And again, making sure that you're monitoring at multiple levels, not just looking for that text on the page, but looking for some of the new tools that allow you to see much more granularly what's happening with your applications. So really the key is, again, DevOps, it's not just about tools, but it's about extending the agile culture. And ultimately what you want to do is get everybody rowing in the same direction. So got my last poll real quickly here. And I'm just curious, you guys all came, thanks for coming today. The question is, what do you hope to achieve with DevOps? I know I've actually talked to a few of you today who are going down this path. Faster, more frequent delivery. Higher quality releases coming up, better communication, collaboration. You know what's funny about this? Nobody ever picks happier teams. There we go, all right. Right on cue. I couldn't have timed that any better. Yeah, so, and I think the key is with this is that what you'll find is that if you're implementing DevOps, it's changing your culture again in your organization. And we hopefully can achieve actually all 5 of those areas as we go through the process. So, you know, again, certainly DevOps is about tools. There's a lot of new tools that you're going to have to learn in your organization if you want to implement DevOps. But the real opportunity with DevOps is about changing the culture in your organization. And it's going to help you become more transparent, help your team collaborate more, and hopefully those same things, if you're using a good agile practice in your organization, you're going to see those same benefits spread through the whole organization, down through operations, all the way up into your business process organization and elsewhere. So you probably saw, I don't know if you saw me wincing a few times during the presentation, we've been at this for about 3 years. We're still struggling in some areas to move this along, but we certainly have had our fair share of bumps. Just so you know, we have a lot of great articles on our website at smallfootprint.com where you can read more about some of the challenges and how we've affected those. I'm also around. I'm more than happy to talk to you if you're interested in how to get going or any of the specific issues that you have. We have a few other small footprint folks around here who just ran out who could help as well. And you can also follow me on my Twitter feed as well as Small Footprint at SFPNC. So any questions? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that. Yeah, are the slides going to be, they will be available. I think we're going to make all the slides available and on somewhere at some point. So you guys will get a communication about that. But I understand that, I think the mechanism hasn't necessarily been defined, but they are going to be made available. And if worst case, you can direct message me at TURNEPF if you don't get a notification about that, and I'll be glad to shoot you a copy directly. Any other questions?
Where can we get a list of tools that you mentioned in your website?
You know, actually, there's a website, and I'm drawing a blank. I think it's something as simple as devops.com, but there is a website that actually lists all of the current tools and tells you all the best practices around those tools. There's probably, I would say, half a dozen tools that we use internally, which I'll be certainly happy to tell you more about that after if you'd like. And if anyone else is interested, if you want to direct message me at my Twitter feed there, I'll be more than happy to shoot you the link to that website where it lists all the current DevOps tools. Good question. I need to put that in my slide deck. Yeah. No, we haven't. We're, you know, like everyone else in the world, we've got a lot of technology debt. And who laughed? You're somebody being honest. Yeah. So we are certainly moving that direction. Kind of our approach has been all of our new projects we're using containers with, and now we're going back and slowly reverting our old projects. If you're not familiar with containers, the biggest challenge right now is .NET projects, which we have a fair number of legacy .NET projects. Most of what we're doing right now is JavaScript, though, and JavaScript's sort of ready-made to go with containers, so those are easy.
You guys go Angular, React?
Yeah, we use, for the front end now, we use a lot of Angular and React, a little bit of Meteor, but mostly Angular and React.
And by container, you mean something like Docker?
Yeah. I think the quote around Docker is like, Docker owns 80% of the container market, and the rest of the market nobody's really using. So, yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
You guys using something like Kubernetes to manage those containers, or
Yeah, we are using Kubernetes and really to describe the infrastructure. Yeah, that was the infrastructure as code piece. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Well, great questions. Thank you. And again, feel free to reach out. I'll be here this afternoon, or if you have any questions, you can reach me through my Twitter feed, or you can email patrick@smallfootprint.com as well. Thanks.